Hello, and thank you for visiting Retirement Tracks. We know that you're probably here because you're seeking some sort of direction with your core assets and that market events the last several years have you concerned about the future. Let me assure you that your worry is not in vain, but it seems to be lost on many professionals these days. Professionals most often use the Great Depression as a benchmark for the history of our markets, as if that were the beginning of the markets and no other time frames are significant. As if the period post-Great Depression through the change of the millennium is permanent and will be recurring. But if you look back starting in 1819, we had a centuries-long chain of what was referred to as panics. These panics led to drops in the market as much as 50%. And more interestingly, they occurred on average every 10 years until the Great Depression, where again we suffered, only this time to the extent of nearly a 90% loss. The significance of this is that what seemed to be a regular and probably expected pattern during the 1800s was broken by the Great Depression, because for nearly 5 decades afterward, the United States enjoyed unprecedented prosperity until 1973 and 74, where a whole new generation had a taste of back-to-back losses amounting to over 50% that had been so prevalent of a century ago. 27 years later, we experienced these losses in the tech bubble, and again 7 years later in the real estate bubble, which is a clear pattern of these 50% losses occurring with greater frequency. Putting this in perspective, Albert Einstein was once asked what he thought was the greatest of mankind's discoveries. His answer? Compound interest. What he was referring to was the Rule of 72. The rule states if you divide the expected return on investments into 72, the answer tells you how many years it takes for your money to double. But after a 50% correction 3 times in 36 years, the Rule of 72 loses its economic excitement. If you lost 50%, it would take a 100% return to recoup those losses, account for inflation, and it could take up to 13 years to recover, possibly just in time for the next 50% fallout. We believe this to be the new pattern for the foreseeable future, which is why we've spent many years working on Retirement Tracks. The results that we found after backtesting this strategy were amazing. Testing Retirement Tracks between 1970 and 2010 was the perfect proving grounds, during which time we saw 3 terrible recessions, a decade of stagflation followed by out-of-control hyperinflation, and arguably the greatest bull market our country's ever seen. During these years, this strategy looked to not only outperform the S&P 500 by 77%, but also appeared to save 75% in what would otherwise be traditional money management fees and indicated 1/5 volatility. Had $100,000 performed exactly like the S&P 500 between 1970 and 2010, it would have returned an average of 8.45% per year. This is not terrible. However, when you add the reality that the average investor probably incurred fees and charges on the order of 2.5% per year, the performance drops to 5.74% per year, a whopping $1.8 million less just from the impact of fees. Couple this with the 1 in 3 chance of suffering a loss the first year you make your investment during this period, and that the average loss is over 14%, it's easy to hang your hat solely on safety. But this chart will show you the price that you pay and lack of long-term performance when you hang your hat solely on safety. The performance of a fixed indexed annuity with an initial bonus of 10%, 100% participation, and a cap of 7% from 1970 would have grown the same investment to $650,000, which is an average return of 4.67%. Not bad, but still approximately $335,000 less than the fully exposed investment even after fees. Again, pointing out the price that you pay and lack of long-term performance when you hang your hat on safety. So if you desire performance but cannot tolerate the risk that it would imply, there needs to be some middle ground, and that's where Retirement Tracks has been a great answer for many investors' core assets. When you take a disciplined approach, history shows that achieving favorable results is possible. Find out how your core assets would have fared. Request your free, no obligation personal illustration today by simply filling out the data fields. Once completed, click the Submit button and get on track with your retirement.